hopefully you guys are brimming with opportunities now. Okay, so like I said, what we're going to be chatting about this week is kind of what I tend to think of as the next step or first step in the grant writing process. Grant writing is a little bit flexible. It's not A, B, C, so you don't have to do things in the order. But that's kind of pre-proposals, and something that kind of naturally comes up whenever we start chatting about pre-proposals are program officers. So we're going to kind of smuggle those in together and talk about them. Okay. So the outline for today is first kind of like, why should you have a pre-proposal? What is it? What do you do with it? Okay. And that's where we're going to talk about program officers and what they do. And then after that, we'll get kind of more into the guts of what actually really truly is a pre-proposal. And then we'll end with how to write a pre-proposal, and that's what we're kind of going to be asking you to do or try in the next few weeks. Sound good? Mm-hmm. Okay. So just kind of as a basic idea to keep in mind while we talk about the why of pre-proposal, it's just a basic short description of what your project is and why it matters. Okay, so it's just laying that out. What are you doing and why? Why should we care about what you're doing it? And I'm going to use the term pre-proposal here. It goes under a lot of different names. Okay, so if you've ran a grant before, you might be familiar with one of these names for it. One pager, although sometimes it's more than one page. NIH, which is probably not one that you guys have worked with a lot, but maybe, you know, Arts and Healing, calls it a specific aims. Letter of intent, also abbreviated LOI, that's a lot of foundations like Templeton. You see that with some NSF. NSF usually kind of calls it a preliminary proposal. Mellon, which we talked about as a source of arts funding, we'll call it a concept note. You also see it as concept paper, again with some foundations. Also closely related is white paper. If they're asking for something a little bit longer, that's when you see white paper. So all of these are the same basic kind of thing. We'll talk, there's a little bit of differences between one and the other, but that's the name that this thing goes under. Okay. So we're just going to call it pre-proposal because that's a big list. Okay, so just basic layout of what are you doing, why are you doing it? Okay, and so if that's what it is, why would you do it? Why would you make one? Okay, so the first reason that you might do is for a lot of grants, it's a required stage. Especially for foundation grants, they often don't want to get inundated with a bunch of things. So they're going to ask for a pre-proposal first and then only invite you to apply if they like your pre-proposal. NSF has a few things like that, some other programs where, so the first reason that you might make one is it's a required step, okay? But the second reason why you might want to do it is for feedback. So NEA, NEH, federal programs all have program officers, and you can ask them to kind of give you feedback on your proposal, and especially what we'll talk about is whether it's a good fit for the grant program. You know, so that is a first step that I really encourage people to do to get that sort of feedback. And you can also shop it around to your peers, to other people, to say, hey, this is my idea, what do you think? You know, when I've done research, you know, I was a physics professor before I started this role. I wrote pre-proposals for my work. Not all of them did I send off for proposals, but sitting down and having to explain what am I doing and why does it matter, I never regretted doing that. Even when I was like, you know what, I don't think this idea is going to get funding, I'm not going to apply for something with it. It's a good exercise to kind of think about why does your research matter and to be able to explain it in a short space. The last reason that you might want to do that is it typically, in a lot of things, becomes part of your proposal. So most applications will have a summary section kind of at the beginning, and you're going to kind of put your pre-proposal in there in the summary. Now I say most, NEA is a big exception. I realize I'm talking to arts folks. So the NEA does not really have a summary section at the beginning. They ask for a synopsis, which is restricted to 200 characters, which is a lot shorter than your typical pre-proposal. So I do want to kind of flag that the NEA is this exception for the pre-proposal why. Okay, does that kind of make sense? Okay. So given that I flagged chatting with program officers, I kind of want to go into that. Who are they and what do they do? So pretty much every federal grant program has program officers. Some foundations do. So like Templeton does have program officers. Other foundations don't. Okay. And so the goal of the program officers is to ensure that they're getting high quality, good proposals to evaluate. That's their job. Their job is usually not actually making the funding decisions. Okay. So it helps to kind of understand their role. So what do? The first thing is they are experts inside and outside of this grant program. The requirements. Okay, so if you ever have a question about what does this requirement mean, so they know the ins and outs of font size and margin and all of that boring stuff if you have a question about it. But more importantly, they know the goals of the program. They know what the program's aims are, what's important. They know what they're going to be looking for and evaluating it. Okay. And so their goal is to kind of give you a heads up or assist you with figuring out whether or not your proposal fits well with the goals or aims. And sometimes they can even talk to you about the structure of your proposal and say, well, you're not really addressing this aim, or it'd be better if you could put something in that deals with this factor or whatever, depending on the program. So they typically give feedback on the proposal ideas. Okay, so the questions that you want to think about here is this suitable for this? Your goal is not to try to convince them to fund your project because they don't make that call. Okay, they basically ensure that no one's wasting their time. So if they tell you that your idea, your research doesn't fit well with the program, it's not that your research is bad. It's not that your idea is bad. It's just a bad fit, and they're telling you that so you don't waste your time sinking time into writing a proposal that's just going to get thrown out and not funded. Okay, so if you find yourself arguing with a program officer, something has gone very, very wrong. Okay, and so they may be able to identify issues your proposal should address. Sometimes they can say, you know, in my experience, reviewers have been very concerned about what's going to happen with this project once it's done. Okay, so they might give you feedback kind of based on that about what they've seen themes that they've seen reviewers being concerned about before. Sometimes they can give suggestions on like timeline, budget, if that's something that you're interested in talking to them about. Okay, not always. It depends on the program officer, depends on the program, that sort of thing. Like I said, things that they don't do. They will pretty much never, ever, ever tell you how likely your project is to get funded. So if you're asking, hi, come in, there are still some seats left. Okay. If you are asking them, you know, can you tell me this is going to be funded? They're going to say no, because they really don't make those decisions. The one exception is the Department of Defense. There, the program officers have a lot of power. But usually that's not what they're doing. And so that's kind of the thing. If you want to know their role, because it's a little bit different between each agency, the application review process, so when you get that full big packet that you can download with all of the details of the program, it's going to say, you know, the program officer will review your proposal to make sure it satisfies the font and margin requirements. And they might do a review to make sure it fits with the priorities, you know. So if you want to know where is the program officer actually going to be involved, that information is usually in the application review section of the full proposal program information on the grants.gov or on their website. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. They're not scary, really. Okay. How do you actually go about contacting the program officers? Okay. Their preferred method of getting in touch varies a little bit agency by agency. Typically one of two ways that you get in touch. You can email them, or you can stop by office hours. I would not recommend cold calling. Okay, that's generally not a good way to get off on the right foot. Okay. So if you're going to email, okay, you want to be clear what you're asking for and why you're reaching out. Do you have a specific question about, like, can I use this subset of the Arial font? Or are you saying, hey, I have this pre-proposal idea that I'd like to kind of chat with you about? Okay. Always, always, always include the grant information, you know, which grant it is, because the program officer may be working on multiple grants. Okay. So tell them which grant you're looking at and which grant you're thinking about doing. I'm going to assume right now you're contacting them with your pre-proposal, because that's what we're talking about today. So you're going to want to give a brief description of your project. You know, not the full pre-proposal, you'll attach that, but kind of a few sentences. Here's what I'm doing and why I think it's a fit. You know, like, this grant is seeking to expand access in the arts, and my project is going to go into K-12 schools and work with kindergartners who might not otherwise have a dedicated art time. Bam, there you go, something like that. So just like why you think it's a good fit. Something that to be aware of, if you're contacting a federal program officer for proposal feedback, they usually will not send you written feedback in an email. Okay, which is unfortunate. That's how I would like to get. But that's because FOIA rules, someone could request all of the feedback that they send back to people. So you usually can't get feedback in writing from a federal program officer. So instead what you'd usually ask them to do is say, I'm attaching my pre-proposal. I'd like to talk to you about this if I can. Could we set up a phone call or a Zoom call to talk through it? And make sure you provide your contact info and times when you're available. These folks are busy, they don't want to have 6 emails going back and forth. How about next Tuesday? Okay, next Tuesday doesn't work. How about the following Thursday? That sort of thing. And also give them time. They're very busy, they're getting lots of pre-proposals from lots of different people. Please don't contact them like 3 days before it would be due and say, can I talk to you tomorrow at 2? Yeah. You know, usual things. Good? Questions? You know, we're all, you know, academics, we kind of know how this goes. And then office hours. Don't you wish your students would come to office hours? Okay, you can go to office hours. You can make someone's day by going to office hours. Okay, so office hours are kind of an opportunity to chat with program officers. Usually the structure is kind of, I know this more so for NSF, so I don't want to promise NEA and NEH are like this, but the usual structure is there's an opportunity for general Q&A. Okay, I have a question about this program, kind of generic. And then they will go into breakout rooms if you want to talk about a specific idea, but you don't want to share it with everyone. Or maybe everyone doesn't really want to hear your specific idea. You probably don't want to hear 20 other people's ideas. So kind of a breakout room with a smaller one-on-one with a proposal, with the program officer to talk about your pre-proposal. And so the breakout rooms, that's where you would kind of say, here's my idea. You probably shouldn't read through your pre-proposal, but it's good to have that there because you might have 5 or 10 minutes to chat with them and you don't want to be brainstorming off the top of your head what your idea is. You want to kind of have it prepared, what's your idea, so you can talk to them there. These tend to be more informal, and I actually have found these to be way more helpful. Especially because it gives you opportunity for immediate feedback, immediate questions, you know. So are you saying that my proposal isn't addressing this issue? What if I added this to my proposal? Would that address your concern? You know, it gives you time to kind of do that. It's usually a good idea to try and have 2 people, one person to kind of talk and one person to take notes, because it is sometimes like a fire hose of ideas. You're in there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then you're like, oh gosh, they raised like 15 things that they thought I should talk about. What was number 12? So if you can grab a colleague, my office, if we have the bandwidth, can help with this, to show up and kind of chat with them. Okay. So NEA, both the grants for arts projects and the research grants in the arts have office hours listed on their website for if you want to attend them. NEH is a little bit different. So they actually will have a full draft deadline where you can send a draft of your full proposal or subsets of it. And then they have office hours usually right before that optional draft deadline. Okay. Okay. I have questions about that. What about foundations? So foundations are pro and con. I found that's usually a lot harder to tell if a project is in scope with foundation, like we talked about last time. The foundations tend to have these broad statements, but then you might look at it and say, oh, they actually only fund things in New York City, or they only fund things that are with community-based organizations and not higher ed, something like that. And so it's often a good idea to ask if you can find a program officer or someone before you sink time into writing a proposal to make sure it's not just going to immediately go, right into the trash can. So if you can find them, I really do recommend reaching out to ask. The problem is some foundations make it almost impossible to find their program officers. So like Templeton will give you a list of names of their program officers and their areas. They do not give you a way to contact them. So if you can find that contact, it's a good idea. If you can't, sometimes that's how it goes. Sometimes you have to send an inquiry to a general, like about at foundation, whatever. And then it'll be redirected to the program officer. Corporate and foundation relations sometimes can help with things if you're looking for a contact or you're not sure how to reach out to a particular foundation. Okay, so, and not all foundations have program officers, the bigger ones often do. Okay, I will share the slides and these resources so you don't have to try and write all of these down, but there are a lot of resources out there. So the University of South Florida actually has an email template for how to contact a program officer if you want that. The Chronicle of Higher Ed actually has an article written by a program officer of what to say and what not to say to that. And the University of Missouri St. Louis turned this into a very nice do and don't list. University of Utah has a page of advice on contacting a program officer. Montclair State has a guide for communicating with program officers. There are a lot of resources out there. It's kind of like your students and professors where it can be kind of intimidating for your student to walk in, but most professors, like 90% of professors, are actually pretty easygoing and flexible. Program officers, they're busier, I think. They have more set schedules than your typical professor. The same thing, where most of them are just really happy to get in touch and talk to you. Okay, so that was kind of the side thing on program officers. So let me just ask questions. Okay. Hopefully I haven't intimidated you.
No.
Okay. So that was a sidetrack from pre-proposal. So now that we know what we do with a pre-proposal, why we might want one, let's go back to that question of what actually is it? Okay. The way I think of pre-proposals is organizing them around 3 questions: why, what, and how. Okay. So the why is your work important? If it's addressing a problem, what is that problem? Like, why should I care about it? You get into an elevator with Jeff Bezos and he says, what are you doing and why should I care? Give me your best answer, The goal is the reviewer should read that bit, okay? Whether it's at the beginning or end or middle, wherever, or integrated. The reviewer, after reading your proposal, should be like, that is a really important problem or issue or something and we have to do something about it. Like, this is something we gotta do something about. Okay, so I come from the sciences, I made this up, so, but the sort of thing, you want something, if you can, that's going to graph. So like, here would be an example of a problem. Visual artwork, it's changed lives, it's a key part of human culture and society, but visually impaired people can't experience it. There's a problem, like it grabs you, and it's like, yes, that's bad, we should do something, I assume.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm not saying too many things that are ignorant about art, but like that's the sort of thing. You want it to be understandable to the person on the street, Jeff Bezos in an elevator. Okay. So that is the why. The next thing is the what. Okay, you've convinced me that there's that I should care about this, that something in the world needs to be changed or addressed. What are you gonna do about that? Tell me what your solution is, okay? If you think about it as problem and solution, there are other ways to phrase it than problem and solution, but tell me the what of what you're going to do now. And so the goal is the reviewer, after reading it, should be like, yes, so the reviewer already says that's something in the world we have to do something about. And now they're like, okay, and you've got a great plan, a great idea for what to do about it, okay? So in my made-up example, okay, well, what I'm going to do is develop tools that enable visually impaired people to experience visual artwork or features or aspects of it with their other senses. Okay, like that's the big picture what. Now, if you read that, you obviously have a lot of questions. How's that going to work? And I'm not an artist, so I don't know. But like that's kind of the big picture what. So the why and the what. And then the last thing is the how. And here you don't want to get into the nitty-gritties, but you want to give a sense of how are you going to do your what, okay? So brief summary or explanation of what you're going to do. Here you want to pull out what are the key steps. If you're bringing in partners, like you're partnering with a community arts organization or something like that, you want to be sure to mention them here, okay? The goals of a reviewer should think, okay, they have a good what and they know what they're doing and they're going to be able to do this. They know how they're going to actually do that. They have a good thought out plan for what they're going to do. Okay, and here's where people sometimes get in trouble because your goal is to get the reviewer to think that it's thought out well. And it can be easy to start putting in details. And all of a sudden your pre-proposal that's supposed to be 1 or 2 pages is like 15. Okay. So the example that I give here is, imagine I was asking you how to get to, I don't know, Target or somewhere, okay? And I wanted to know that you had a detailed plan, maybe New York, okay? We're going to drive from here to New York, okay? And I want to know not directions, not turn left at the second traffic light, turn right, 0.2 miles after that, whatever, okay? That's the directions, and that's going to go right over my head. To know that you have a detailed plan, I want something where you're going to be like, you're going to be hitting rush hour traffic around Winchester. So you're going to take this bypass around Winchester. Okay. So you kind of want to be flagging the key parts and how you're going to address it, but you don't have to give the nitty-gritty of everything you're doing. Does that make sense, the difference between well thought out versus detailed? It's a little strange. Okay. And then the key thing here is short, short, short. Okay, so white paper, pre-proposal, basically you want to keep it 2 pages max, okay? 1 page is good, so, okay, make sense? Okay, and so oftentimes, especially in the sciences, they describe it as your elevator pitch, that's kind of what you want to be thinking about it as. Okay. There's a book that you may have seen. I know that the Office of Research Development had some reading groups on it last year, called The Grant Writing Guide by Betty, I believe that's Lay, I'm not actually sure how it's pronounced. She gives very, very specific directions for how to write. If that's helpful for you, feel free to check out that book. I know the library has some copies. Some people don't really like the 2 sentences on this and then 3 sentences like that, and that's okay, so her book can be very helpful. It also doesn't work well for some people. But the possible structure that she suggests for this, in case it's helpful, is she first does it significant area. That's kind of my why, like what's important about this, what's been done in that area. You're probably not the first person to work on art for visually impaired or whatever. So say what's been done, but then say what the problem is with what's already out there, okay? She tends to phrase it as gap. Explain what the gap is. That may or may not fit with your research direction, okay? And then once you've done that, then convince them that you know the best way to solve the problem. And ideally, that's what you're proposing doing, So that whole thing is laying up kind of the why, and then this is kind of the what, and then explain what your plan is for the project, the how. And she suggests emphasizing its feasibility. This isn't pie in the sky, but that it's innovative. It's not something that anyone else can do. They can't fund Bob down the street to do the same thing. They need you. Okay. And then if there's specific outcomes of your work, which hopefully there's something that you can point to, that will be the last one. Okay. So this is a structure that she has, and in her book she'll say so many sentences on this bit, so many sentences on that bit. Check it out if that jives well with your style of doing things. Okay. Okay, so now we know the what. I want to do a little bit more. This has been bleeding into the how, but some advice on kind of the how. Okay, writing advice. I know it's hard, but you want to stay away from jargon. in the pre-proposal. So we're used to giving academic presentations or presentations to our fellow members of the department or at conferences and such, where you really want to justify your knowledge. There's a place for that in the proposal. There's a place where you show off that you kind of know your stuff. That's not the pre-proposal. You're not trying to convince the reviewer that you are the expert on this topic in the pre-proposal. The pre-proposal is where you are speaking broadly. Okay, so you want to stay away from jargon. Okay, if you wouldn't use it talking to Jeff Bezos in the elevator, you probably shouldn't throw that phrase in. Okay, so I always found it hard, but I just remembered that there's the, NSF, you've got 15 pages of your project description. That's where you're going to get the nuts and bolts of it. The pre-proposal is just not the right place for that. And if you have to write it down and put it off to the side for when you put the proposal, that's okay too. You're trying to make people care. You're not trying to convince people that you know your stuff. So you go to a conference, you're in a room with people who already care about it. And yes, your NEA, there are people who sign up to work at the NEA. Yes, it's going to be peers who evaluate it, but they're coming from it at a slightly different angle, so you have to say, why does it care? Think about your congressman, who might not like funding the NEA or NEH. Why should they care? What difference is what your work going to make? And that's kind of what you want to keep in mind. Other questions, how is it done today? What are the limits of current progress? What's new in your approach? Why do you think you'll be successful? These actually come from this thing called the Hillmeyer Catechism. If you laughed, you're Presbyterian. So that is actually developed by a DARPA director for proposals, not pre-proposals. So I excerpted some of it. But it's a good thing to look at if you want an idea. It's a list of questions that after reading your proposal, the program officers or the grant officers should be able to answer like that. So some of the things like, what's the budget? That's not something that you're normally going to address in the pre-proposal. But these are questions that someone should read your pre-proposal and be able to answer it. Okay, so if you've written it well. So they're ones that you should think about. You also want to make it clear enough that someone else, and that's part of why we're going to do a peer exercise, is just because it's clear in your head doesn't always mean it's clear in your reader's head. So it can be helpful to shop your pre-proposal around to someone you know and kind of ask them, hey, what did you get out of this? In your own words, why is this important? That sort of thing. Okay. So, do you need to know your intended funder to write a pre-proposal? No. When I start a research project, I often write a pre-proposal well before I have in mind who would fund it. Okay. You absolutely do not need to know that, and I hope kind of the way of thinking about it is made clear. But it can help if you know your intended funder, and often before you send it off to a program officer or someone, it can kind of help to go back and read it with the program funder in mind. Part of that is, that huge list of terms I had at the beginning, some of them will have length limits. If you're writing a statement of aims for the NIH, they're going to have a length limit. Some of, especially foundations, might say, do not send us anything over 1 page. And if your pre-proposal is 1 page in a paragraph, gotta chop it. So they may have specific length limits. They also may have specific goals. We talked about the research and arts NEA program last time. That has 4 specific goals, so you might have a wonderful why, but if it's not really lining up with one of their goals, it may not be the best thing. One of the things that differs between those different things is they may or may not want budget info. Okay, so a foundation might say, in your letter of intent, please give us an expected budget range. Okay, or they may not. And then if it's required for part of the grant, there may be things that go along with the pre-proposal, a cover letter, different bits that you may have to throw in. That's what makes all of those slightly different from each other. So yeah.